HOA tried to destroy my parents' forest. I used their own rules against them. The letter from the HOA arrived on a Wednesday, 4 pages. Big bold letters, fines totaling $6,000, their crime trees. Tree squirrels in the sheer audacity of wanting to live surrounded by nature. But what the HOA didn't realize was this: they had just declared war, and they handed me their rulebook as a weapon. My parents aren't troublemakers. In fact, they're about the most peaceful people you'll ever meet. Back in the 1970s, they were your classic hippies growing their own food, living off the grid, believing in peace, love, and letting everyone live their lives without interference. That's exactly what they were doing. Out in rural Texas, about an hour outside Austin, they bought a piece of land in 2002, 10 acres of pure, quiet forest. It wasn't a glamorous place. No HOA, no clubhouse, no neon-colored Welcome to Whispering Pines signs. Just oak trees, birch trees, and the occasional family of deer. For nearly 2 decades, they lived in peace. Then came the development. In 20, a housing company bought up hundreds of acres nearby and launched a new subdivision, the Retreat at Silver Creek. A master-planned, eco-friendly neighborhood, or so they claimed. They advertised it as living in harmony with nature. What they really meant was living in harmony with perfectly trimmed grass, manicured bushes, and 1,000 rules about what harmony means. As soon as the subdivision filled up, they formed a homeowners association. At first, it had nothing to do with my parents. Their land wasn't part of the development. They didn't want in. They didn't need the pool, the tennis courts, or the neighborhood wine socials. But that didn't stop the HOA. For the next 3 years, they knocked on my parents' door, literally and figuratively, trying to persuade them to join. They sent letters, they left flyers, they even offered to waive certain fees for founding members. My parents said no, repeatedly. They were happy with their trees, their birds, and their privacy. When persuasion failed, the HOA changed tactics. First came the complaints. The new neighbors, most of whom had moved from the city, didn't like the look of a natural forest next to their pristine backyards. It looks messy. It attracts wildlife. Weeds lower our property values. Of course, what they called weeds were wildflowers. What they called messy was a thriving ecosystem. But the HOA didn't care about nature, they cared about appearances. By 2023, the HOA's tone had shifted from friendly to hostile. They claimed my parents' land was an undeveloped eyesore. They started reporting violations to the county, all baseless. They even built the community clubhouse gym and a massive 10-foot cross right along the border of my parents' property. Subtle. In early 2024, worn down and hoping to avoid further trouble, my parents reluctantly signed the HOA agreement. They thought compliance would bring peace. Within a week, 4 violation notices arrived. The letters order them to clear all non-conforming landscaping, meaning cut down the forest or face escalating fines up to $6,000, my mother cried. Not because of the money, but because losing the trees would mean losing the squirrels she fed every morning, the birds she watched from her porch, and the shade that kept the Texas sun bearable. It wasn't just a fight over property, it was a fight over the life they'd built. If we don't comply, they might take us to court, my father said. If we do comply, we lose everything. That's when I stepped in. I drove down that weekend and spent 2 days reading every line of the HOA bylaws. And that's when I found it. Page 47, Section 12(3), Landscaping, Preservation, and Protected Flora. In their quest to control everyone's yards, the HOA had written a rule requiring that any plant removal must be pre-approved to protect endangered species and preserve biodiversity. Not just new trees. Every tree, even ones planted decades before the HOA existed. They wanted to use rules against my parents. Perfect. I'd use those same rules to bury them in paperwork. They think they're clever. I told my parents, but they just handed us the exact rope they'll hang themselves with. Finding the loophole was the easy part. Exploiting it, that would take patience and paperwork. Lots and lots of paperwork. I called up an old friend from my college days, Dr. Emily Carter, now a professor of botany at the University of Texas. Emily, I said, how would you like to make $1,000 identifying plants? Depends, she replied cautiously. Is this legal? Perfectly, and you'll be striking a blow for environmental justice. That got her attention. A week later, Emily arrived at my parents' property with a team of grad students, clipboards in hand. Over 2 days, they cataloged every tree, bush, vine, and sapling. This place is a gold mine, she whispered. Half these species aren't even on most people's radar. By the end of the survey, we had documented 88 unique plant species. Some common, some rare, some And this was key, potentially protected under state conservation guidelines. Emily drafted an official report. It included species names, photographs, locations, GPS tagged, estimated age and health of each plant. "You're about to drown them in bureaucracy," she grinned. "That's the idea." The HOA's own bylaws, the ones they proudly enforced with fines and smug emails, required written approval before any vegetation removal, Section 12(3), Paragraph 4 to be exact. So I followed their rules. I created a template email requesting removal approval for each plant. Each email included photo evidence, species identification, GPS location, reference to the botanist's report, a request for written approval per HOA guidelines. Then I started sending them, one email per plant. By the end of the week, 137 emails had gone out. By the end of the month, over 700 every single tree. At first, the HOA responded diligently. Request received under review. Request pending, please allow 14 business days. They even approved 2 small shrubs. Progress right. Then the replies stopped. The HOA's volunteer landscaping committee, normally responsible for checking flower beds and measuring grass height, was overwhelmed. Neighbors began to notice, "Why haven't they reviewed my patio request?" One complained on the neighborhood Facebook page. "Why is the HOA ignoring mailbox violations?" Another grumbled. The HOA president, let's call him Richard, because of course his name was Richard, sent my parents a formal letter. "Your excessive and unreasonable requests are hindering community operations. Cease immediately or face further penalties." "Oh no," my mother fretted. "Should we stop?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "They made the rules. We're just following them." Before continuing, I consulted with a real estate attorney, Miss Laura Chen, who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed the botanist's report, the emails, and the HOA bylaws. "You're golden," she said. "They can't legally penalize you for complying with their own procedures. If they attempt to fine you for submitting requests, that's retaliatory and opens them to a lawsuit. What if they ignore the requests entirely? Then they're violating their own enforcement policy, which can also be grounds for legal action." Perfect. After nearly 1,000 emails, the HOA finally broke. Richard himself called my parents. "Let's be reasonable," he said, voice strained. "We'll approve all removals at once. No more individual requests. We can expedite the process." They thought they'd checkmate us. If we accepted, the forest would be cleared, no more paperwork, no more delays. "Sounds good," I said sweetly. "That will make it easier to install the religious symbols." "What?" "The swastikas," I clarified. "Once the trees are gone, they'll be much more visible from the road, the clubhouse, and the park. I'm thinking 10 feet tall at least." "You can't be serious." "Oh, I am. My parents are Jainists. The swastika is a sacred symbol in their faith, thousands of years older than its unfortunate misuse by the Nazis. Section 2 of SB 1588 protects religious symbols on private property. But, and don't worry," I added cheerfully, "we'll include the small dots inside the arms so people know it's the Jain version. Very tasteful, very legal." Silence. "Let me call you back," Richard finally muttered. That afternoon, a delegation from the HOA board arrived. Richard, 2 other board members, and the HOA's attorney. For over an hour, they argued the symbols would be provocative. They might upset the community. It's an unreasonable change. But every objection crumbled against the cold, hard facts. 1. Freedom of religion under both state and federal law. 2. SB 1588 protections explicitly allowing religious symbols. Their own landscaping approvals would make the symbols more visible. Not my fault. Finally, their attorney whispered something to Richard. His shoulders sagged. "Fine," he sighed. "We'll grandfather your parents' property. No more clearing requirements. No more fines. Just keep the trees and let's all move on." Victory word spread fast. Neighbors who had once complained about the messy forest suddenly changed their tune. "We didn't want them fined, just tidied up a bit. The forest provides nice shade." Honestly, the HOA went too far. Funny how people reconsider when the alternative is 10-foot religious symbols looming over their backyards. By the end of summer 2024, the violation notices stopped. The forest remained untouched. The squirrels kept visiting. My mom returned to her morning routine, feeding the birds and sipping coffee on the porch. "They finally left us alone," she smiled. "No," I corrected. "They realized picking this fight was more trouble than it was worth." If you think this was wild, wait till you hear what Karen and the HOA tried next. Trust me, they weren't done yet. The HOA had blinked. They backed off. The fines agreed to grandfather the property and begrudgingly let my parents keep their forest. Most people would have called that a victory, but HOA Karens rarely know when to quit. For a few glorious months, things were peaceful. My parents went back to their quiet routines. My mom fed the squirrels. My dad planted a small vegetable garden under the trees. Birds returned. Even a family of foxes made their den at the far end of the property. Neighbors seemed relieved too. No more drama. No more heated HOA meetings. Or so we thought. In September 2024, another letter arrived. This time not from the HOA board, but from the county zoning department. Notice of code violation, non-compliant structure. According to the complaint, the privacy fence along the edge of my parents' property, the same one that kept HOA members and nosy neighbors from wandering and violated new setback requirements. Your fence must be reduced in height or removed entirely within 30 days. And just like that, the HOA had found a new angle. They couldn't find my parents for the forest, but if they could get the fence torn down, it would leave the backyard and the entire forest exposed to the clubhouse, the park, and the main road. It's not a coincidence. I told my parents, they want to intimidate you into either leaving or finally clearing the land. I filed a public records request, and guess who submitted the zoning violation complaint? That's right, Richard, the HOA president, using his full name and HOA email address. No subtlety whatsoever. Legally, the HOA wasn't supposed to meddle with properties outside their direct control, but by reporting a concerned citizen complaint to the county, they thought they could sidestep that rule. What they didn't count on. I had zoning experience. Years ago, I'd served as a volunteer on a county planning committee. I knew the process and the loopholes. First, I pulled the original property records. The fence was built in 2005, long before the new setback rules were adopted in 2023. It was also constructed with the proper permits at the time. Under county regulations, it qualified as a grandfathered structure, meaning it was exempt from new zoning requirements. Second, I reviewed the HOA's own actions. While they were busy pointing fingers at my parents' fence, I noticed something interesting. Richard's own property had an illegal retaining wall. It had been expanded without a permit the year prior. Several neighbors had complained about it, including one whose yard had flooded as a result. Third, I hired a surveyor to confirm the fence's compliance and document everything. Every inch measured, every record notarized. The county scheduled a public hearing to review the complaint. Richard showed up, smug clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 other HOA board members. I brought my parents, the surveyor, the original permit records, and 2 neighbors who were fed up with the HOA's overreach. We're here today to address the alleged fence violation, the zoning officer began. Richard immediately launched into a speech about community aesthetics, safety concerns, and property value protection. It's not personal, he insisted, but the fence does not conform to the updated standards. I waited patiently. When it was my turn, I laid out the fence's original permit from 2005 grandfathered status under current zoning laws, surveyor confirmation of compliance, the HOA president's clear conflict of interest and pattern of harassment. Then I dropped the bomb. Additionally, and I said, I'd like to submit evidence that Mr. Richard's own property is in violation of multiple zoning and floodplain regulations, including an unpermitted retaining wall, causing drainage issues for neighboring lots. The zoning officer paused. Mr. Richard, were you aware of these concerns? Richard's smug expression vanished. I wasn't prepared to discuss that today. Perhaps we should schedule a separate hearing, the officer suggested dryly. After reviewing the evidence, the county ruled. The fence was fully compliant and grandfathered. No action was required. The complaint was dismissed as baseless. An investigation into Richard's retaining wall violation was open. By now, word had spread. Neighbors who had stayed neutral were beginning to speak out. We moved here for peace, not power struggles. One family posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, the HOA has gone too far. We support the Thompsons, enough is enough. Even former HOA allies started distancing themselves from Richard and his inner circle. The county's investigation into Richard's property escalated quickly. He faced fines, mandatory remediation, legal fees. Under mounting pressure, Richard resigned as HOA president. 2 other board members followed. A special election was held. For the first time in years, residents who valued fairness and community, not control, took leadership positions. And the first action they took, passing a resolution to cease all future enforcement actions against grandfathered properties. My parents' forest was officially off limits. One evening, my mom and I sat on the porch watching the sunset through the trees. "I can't believe it's finally over," she whispered. "It's not just over," I replied. "You won. You kept what mattered. The squirrels, the birds, the foxes all still there. The forest stood proud and untouched. If you thought this battle was won, wait till you hear what Karen and the HOA tried after losing the election. The story's not over yet." Richard resigned after the fence incident. But the HOA did not disband. A major symbol, Karen, was replaced, and she was more dangerous. Her name was Karen Whitfield. No, seriously, Karen. You can't make this up. After Richard's downfall, she had quietly maneuvered into a leadership role as compliance chair. While Richard used bulldozer tactics, Karen preferred slow, suffocating pressure, death by 1,000 paper cuts. It started with small, petty violations. Trash can placement a minute too early. Porch light brightness, apparently. Blinding aircraft, driveway maintenance, minor cracks labeled trip hazards. My parents received weekly violation notices, each carrying a $50 or $100 fine, enough to annoy, not enough to justify a lawsuit. "This isn't about money," my dad sighed. "They want to wear us down. They're betting you'll give up before they do," I agreed. But they've miscalculated. Then came the real danger. Karen proposed a bylaw amendment, reclassification of non-conforming adjacent properties as aesthetic hazards subject to city review and potential acquisition. Translation, if passed, the HOA could petition the city to forcibly buy my parents' land at a price far below market value. They called it preserving neighborhood aesthetics. I called it legalized land theft. "It's a hostile takeover disguised as landscaping policy," my attorney, Ms. Chen, said bluntly. I didn't wait. First, I rallied the neighbors. Many were secretly frustrated with the HOA's bullying. Several had faced fines for trivial matters. Garden gnomes, mailbox colors, even patriotic bunting during July 4th. "If they can do this to the Thompsons, they can do it to any of us," one neighbor whispered. I also contacted the Texas Private Property Legal Alliance, TPPLA. They offered legal backing and public advocacy. "Karen thinks she's playing chess." Ms. Chen smiled. "We're about to flip the board." Karen called for a HOA-wide vote on the bylaw change. She expected a quiet, compliant vote. No fuss. She got the opposite. I demanded transparent balloting, citing Texas HOA statutes. I also hired 2 independent auditors to oversee the process. On voting day, Karen arrived at the clubhouse, clipboard in hand, radiating smug confidence. "We must act to protect our community standards," she declared. But when the ballots were counted, 17 in favor, 28 against, her proposal defeated. During ballot verification, one of the auditors flagged a problem. "These 5 ballots, the names don't match current residents." Public records confirmed. All 5 voters had moved away months ago. The ballots all voted in favor of Karen's proposal. Coincidence not likely. I immediately requested access to HOA correspondence related to the vote, a right guaranteed under Texas law. And there it was. An email thread from Karen to her assistant. "Use the old mailing list. We need every vote we can get." Nobody will check. I had my smoking gun. I called for a special HOA meeting. Karen tried to delay, tried to stall, but under the bylaws, she couldn't block it. The clubhouse was packed. Residents, attorneys, TPPLA representatives, and even a few local reporters. I presented the fraudulent ballots, the incriminating emails, witness testimony from Karen's former assistant. This wasn't just a dirty trick, I told the crowd. It was an attempt to steal private property through fraud. Karen stood face flushed. "This is a conspiracy," she shrieked. "They're trying to silence me because I care about property values." No one bought it. Even her few remaining allies sat stone-faced. The HOA board voted unanimously. Karen Whitfield is hereby removed from the board. A report will be filed with the county for potential criminal charges. Karen's fall was swift. She was sued for election fraud and abuse of authority. Faced with legal bills and public humiliation, she sold her home and disappeared. The new HOA board passed a resolution. No further enforcement actions against grandfathered properties, including the Thompsons' forest. My parents kept their forest, their peace, and most importantly, their dignity. Neighbors who once stayed silent now spoke out. "We're sorry we didn't stand up sooner." One family admitted, The HOA's culture shifted. Control gave way to respect and Karen. Just a footnote in the neighborhood's history. One evening as the sun set behind the trees, my mom smiled. "Do you think they'll ever try again?" Maybe, I said, but now the community knows better. If you think this was the end, wait until you hear what happened at the next HOA election. Karen may have left, but someone tried to carry on her legacy. Karen's resignation was just the start. Within days of the emergency HOA meeting, the county launched an investigation into her election fraud and abuse of authority. The fraudulent ballots and email chain left little doubt about her intent. By March 2025, the county prosecutor filed civil charges. Karen was forced into a settlement, $25,000 in legal fees and penalties, a public apology to the community, a 5-year ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. She sold her home quietly. No goodbye party, no farewell emails. Just a moving truck at dawn. With Karen gone, the HOA underwent a transformation. The new board members, many of whom had stood with us, passed 3 major reforms. Protection for grandfathered properties. No enforcement actions allowed without unanimous board approval and legal review. Transparency mandates. All HOA communications and votes must be publicly documented. Limitations on fines, caps placed on non-safety related fines to prevent harassment. The power-hungry HOA was dead in its place. A community-focused association that finally listened to residents. For the first time in years, my parents felt at peace. Neighbors who once stayed silent came forward with apologies and support. "We should have spoken up sooner," one family said. "Your fight helped all of us," said another. And the best part, the forest thrived. Birds returned, squirrels played, even the fox family had new kits that spring. In April 2025, the HOA hosted a Community Appreciation Day. During the event, the new board presented my parents with a simple hand-carved wooden sign, Thompson's Grove, a symbol of perseverance. It wasn't just a name, it was a message. This forest stands because good people stood up when it mattered. The board president said, "My mom cried happy tears this time." By summer, the violation notices had stopped. The emails ceased. The drones which Karen once used to spy disappeared. My parents finally reclaimed what they always wanted: quiet privacy, freedom. You know, my dad mused one evening as we sat on the porch. If we'd just sold the land like they wanted years ago, none of this would have happened. True, I nodded. But then they'd think bullying works. Instead, he smiled, we showed them that standing your ground and knowing the rules can outlast any bully. Think this is where it ends? You'd think after Karen left, things would settle down for good. But wait until you hear what happened at the next HOA annual meeting. The forest wasn't the only thing that needed protecting. Looking back, it's easy to wonder, was it worth it? The stress, the legal fees, the endless emails, the sleepless nights, wondering if my parents would lose the land they loved. But here's the truth, yeah, it was worth every moment. Because the alternative, letting bullies win, would have cost far more. If this story taught me anything, it's this: know your rights. Most HOA boards count on residents being too intimidated or too exhausted to fight back. But those bylaws they love to wield like weapons, they can cut both ways. Build alliances. My parents weren't alone. Neighbors who once stayed silent became allies. And organizations like TPPLA exist for a reason: to protect property owners from overreach. Patience is power. Bullies want quick victories. Dragging out the fight using legal means often makes them give up before you do. My parents kept their forest. But more importantly, the community changed. What started as an HOA dictatorship became a neighborhood of mutual respect. Your fight helped all of us, one neighbor told me. And that's the kind of victory that lasts. Now, I know many of you watching have faced your own Karen or HOA nightmare. Maybe it was a flag you weren't allowed to fly, or a flower bed deemed too colorful, or like my parents, the simple desire to enjoy your land without interference. I want to hear your stories. Leave a comment below. Have you ever stood up to an unreasonable HOA or neighborhood bully? What happened? What did you learn? Your experience might just help someone else facing the same fight. Justice doesn't always come quickly. But when it does, when good people stand together, it reminds us all. Rules don't belong to bullies. They belong to the people willing to learn them and stand their ground. If you enjoyed this story, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend who might need some neighborhood inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales where the good guys win eventually. And trust me, the next story, you won't want to miss it.